And of course, there is a lot of global instability. It's driving up costs, disrupting supply chains and softening confidence. So the impact on businesses is really being felt.
Yeah, it's also affecting the valuations of small and medium-sized businesses. So joining us now is Simon Bedard, who runs Exit Advisory Group and is the author of Exit Like an Expert, a guide to selling businesses. Just my first question, Simon, is now a good time to be selling a business and exiting?
Well, look, I think it really depends on what you're selling and who you're selling it to, right? Timing is always an important issue, and I think business owners need to constantly be looking at the environment, the macro picture, their own business, and trying to weigh all of that up.
So what is the biggest mistake when a business owner exits a business that they can make?
Look, probably just a lack of preparation. I think a lot of business owners spend many, many years building their business and they have a belief around what it's worth, and that's not necessarily aligned with what the market thinks. So it's being prepared, having a business that's very robust, and I guess looking at it through the eyes of an acquirer so you understand what people are actually buying.
But sorry, I was just saying everybody wants to sell at a premium.
Absolutely.
So how do those two things add up?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's about, once again, looking at the business and saying, well, what is it that acquirer really wants out of all of this? Because people aren't buying your past and, the awards and the things on the walls. They're buying your future stream of profit and cash flow. And so what they'll ultimately do is apply some sort of a risk filter over that as to how predictable that profit is going forward. So for a business owner, you need to be able to look at your business, your model, what you do, how you do it, look for the various risk factors that are involved there and try to mitigate those for any particular buyer. There's a clear relationship, right, between value and risk. The higher the risk, the lower the value that you can achieve.
And how do you take the emotion out of it? Because so many business owners say, look, this is my first baby or my third baby or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, it's common. And I think for business owners, that's a journey too, right? It's different for everybody. I think a big part of it is taking the time to step back and recognize that your business is an asset. Usually one of the biggest assets that most business owners actually own. But looking at it and saying, well, ultimately every business, like a child, I guess, needs to mature and eventually leave home and move on. So, so look, it's a process.
Yeah, so I know that you've got this book, Exit Like an Expert. Do you think that business owners are at risk of sort of thinking that it's somebody else's issue, whether they leave it to their kids to deal with, leave it to their accountant to deal with, or is this something that right from the get-go, every savvy business owner will be sort of thinking about, planning, hopefully setting up for the future?
Yeah, look, I think most business owners, recognize at some point in their journey that they're building something of value. And so there becomes a question around, well, what do I do with this business? What do I do with this asset? I think we're in a time these days where passing the business down to the next generation is happening less often. Mm-hmm. Certainly, to the second generation and even less to the third generation. We're in a better place now where kids are more educated, they have more options, less kids want to follow their parents into business. So I think for the business owner, I think you need to be realistic about who's going to want to run this company? Does it make sense to keep it in the business or in the family as an asset? Or are you better off to look for an external buyer who can actually take this business and do something more with it? And then the family's kind of freed up to take that capital and do what they want.
So if you say there's no definition of a great exit, how does one exit like an expert?
Look, I think it's about being really clear about your personal ambitions and goals. And I always say there are 5 core things every business owner needs to understand when they're exiting. The first is, of course, money or valuation. What do you need from this business, particularly if you're retiring and you're using that money to move on to the next phase of your life. The second is timing. How long do you want to keep doing what you're doing? And that's working in the business as well as owning the asset. The third component is legacy. I think about customers, suppliers, employees. What do you want people to say about you when you've left the room? And does that even matter? For some people, legacy is not an issue. Of course, there's always terms and structures and things like that when you go to exit a business, such as, if you sold a business today, or you started selling the business today, typically it takes anything up to 12 months to actually get a transaction done. Mm-hmm. Many business buyers will actually ask the owner to hang around for a while after the deal. So you might end up working for somebody else for a year or two. So there's this whole thing around, how long do I want to keep doing this? It might be much longer than you think, if you want a higher number or, you're trying to achieve other things. So,
Simon, who are you? Are you an expert at exiting?
well, I've been through a few exits myself. So we founded Exit Advisory Group, which is a specialist firm that does mergers and acquisitions. We're just coming up on our 10th birthday, so it's been an exciting time. So we've helped hundreds of clients through this process in businesses ranging from really a couple of $1 million up to well over 100 million in value. So it's really a broad cross-section of industry sectors, business types, deal structures. So yeah, this is something we live and breathe every day.
And what's your model, the Value 360? What does that include?
Yeah, so look, it's really about looking at the business and the 5 core sectors that most investors look at. So, financial performance is one, and it's not just the numbers, it's actually what the numbers have been doing, the trends, how they're performing. There's a growth system, which is all about marketing and sales. How do you generate new business reliably into a business, into a company? Your fulfillment system is how you deliver on what you've sold. Of course, people and leadership are always a massive factor, and your overall operating model. So they're the 5 core sectors we talk about in the book. There is, of course, a lot more detail there around how to break those core sectors down, but yeah.
That's what I was going to say. We don't want to give it all away. We
Yeah,
want people
yeah,
to go
yeah.
out and buy the book, Exit Like an Expert. I'm really pleased to have you come and join us on this Friday. But I think what I've taken away is that if you want to sell your business and you want to get out of running the business, you've got to start this process early.
Start early
No
indeed.
time like the present.
Absolutely.